What is it, Brian?
Well, progressive tension basically began with the idea. Let me rewind. So all the string sets that we used growing up didn't really seem like they came from a logical place. I'm sure you guys can agree with me here, right? Like,
absolutely.
Sometimes like if the high string feels really good for a bend, the low strings will be a little too floppy and spaghetti-like, right? If the high strings feel nice and tight, maybe the low strings are too tight. Started making custom sets and discovered that literally not a single manufacturer out there was making a string set that perfectly catered to my needs as a guitarist, as well as our collective needs. So the idea began purely scientifically of using a tension calculator to find what we thought would be the best and most ideal set of strings tension-wise on the guitar. Played it, and it felt absolutely horrible, as we discovered.
It didn't sound that great either.
It didn't sound that great either.
Yeah.
So we were like, okay, science will only get us so far. We have to start making little refinements, little adjustments to the actual gauges, and that's where we discovered that, okay, a lot of science, some intuition, and then a little bit of feel thrown in the mix. We started to discover that we were onto something, and that was kind of the idea of the progressive tension. It was a gradual increase in tension from the high strings to the low strings, where oftentimes if you actually plugged in pre-existing string sets into a tension calculator, you'll find odd inconsistencies, right? You'll find like the high E is tighter and has more tension than the B string, which is like, you would think that the highest one would be easiest to bend, right? So little things like that made me think about that maybe people that designed strings before literally had no idea what they were doing, or maybe didn't even play guitar. They were just going off of, this works, this has worked in the past.
Or just look at it maybe a bit scientifically, or just like making the numbers get bigger a certain way and not accounting for tension or the wind or whatever.
At all, right? And then as soon as you get into alternate tunings or needing heavier, then it's a whole new nightmare, right? Because we started to discover not a single manufacturer made a set that catered to, playing in drop C, ideally,
There would be drop C sets.
And then
but it was always like,
who
came up with this? Like, have you ever actually played a drop C guitar with this set? Because this is just weird. So yeah, like you start just ordering your custom. I was doing this before, where I'd just be building my own sets, like from whatever manufacturer, like just being like, just give me singles, and I'll just build my set the way that I like it. Because I was having that same problem. I was like, no one's really nailing this,
And that's pretty much Horizon Devices in a nutshell, right? We find little things that irk us about pre-existing products in the industry. And as nerds, as gear nerds and lovers of all thing gear, we always think to ourselves, how could I fix this or remedy this for my own selfish needs, right? The Precision Drive, our first product, that was something we selfishly made just because we wanted to make, right? And when it came time for the strings, it was much the same idea, where it's like, how can we make our perfect ideal string sets and do it from a selfish need there to maybe not have to order the custom sets where we have the individual gauges, right?
Exactly.
And then quickly discovered, as with our other stuff, it's like, hey, we're onto something here. Other people might like this too. And that's kind of how it was born and came from there. But as always, it came from a selfish need for finding our own sets that worked for us. And it was quite an organic process, and it was a treat hooking up with you, Frank, and doing this, because I quickly found like, finally, someone that works at a company that's as big of a nerd as we are about these things, right? You're as big of a nerd about strings and tension and wrap ratios and every little alloy, every little detail of the string. So we started talking, and right off the bat, I'm like, man, I love working with you. I hope I love the strings as much as I love working with you. And we soon found out that we actually fell in love with these strings, both of us collectively. And the interesting thing too, we separately set out, like, I'm going to find the gauges I like, you find the gauges you like, and then we're going to compare notes and kind of see where we're going. And we were almost like 99% on.
Yeah, other than like a couple gauges where we just, and I think wherever we disagreed, it was like always this balance between, well, this one feels a bit better, but this one sounds a bit better. And like, and that's why it didn't take very long to resolve, because we're just like, oh, well, this is the way we'll go for this set, But we were so close, and Brian and I play very different styles of music. So it shows that there's something sort of universal about like the feel of an instrument, regardless of the tuning or whatever. You are looking for something, and might be a bit abstract, might be a little hard to put into words, but apparently we know it when we feel it. And the fact that we sort of went in with this sort of art meets science approach of like, all right, let's just see where we land. And we ended up very, very close to each other shows that there is something about this set that should resonate with most people. And it, in the little bit of time that we've had these out, that's been the case. I remember we did the NAMM booth with Tosin, with a Bassi, and we had the strings on the guitars, and like I'd never gotten so many people commenting about strings before. I never thought it's like, what are these strings? They feel great. Like what tuning? Like I was like, the tuning or the setup. It's like whatever. It's like, no, man, these are just our strings in the tunings you're used to, but you're just feeling the difference because ultimately it's the only thing you're really touching on the guitar, right? And it determines your sound. So the fact is, it has to sound right and it has to feel right. Or the guitar, it doesn't matter how good the guitar is. It doesn't even matter how well set up the guitar is. It won't feel right. You feel like you're going to be fighting it to some degree. That's the worst. No one wants to be playing a guitar that they're fighting. You'll always reach for that one that just feels intuitive. And I feel like that's what we were able to nail, is like a way to make these tunings just feel a little bit more intuitive.
Yeah, a lot of people, I find, a lot of guitarists don't really think about their strings, which is crazy. You just said, I was thinking as you said it, that's the part that you interface with the most on the guitar. That's the part that you're touching outside of the neck, right? And for a lot of guitarists, we put a bunch of money into our amps and into our pedal board and into buying these nice boutique guitars, maybe swapping out the pickups even. But then the strings are just something that's an afterthought. It's your toothpaste. It's whatever you've used your whole life and you don't even think about it. But it makes, as we've discovered, such a drastic and radical difference both to the sound and the feel of the instrument, And I know we might play different things, but we look for similar things in an instrument. We want a certain amount of resonance, certain amount of snap, certain amount of body. And, I was really thrilled when we tested out the alloys to these strings to find that they had that satisfying brightness and snap that you get out of a brand new set of strings, but without any of the like harsh high end, right? Yeah. There was a fullness and body to it. I remember you calling me and being like, am I crazy? Or these like have all that high end, but there's also this full warmth to it. And
they were making sets from Redacted sound a little bit thin. But like, you could bleep that out. But like, it's very true because, at least, it's funny how much overlap there is given that we play very different styles of music. Ultimately, I think a good instrument's a good instrument, and there's something universal in what we look for in a guitar, But yeah, like these strings, I'd always been chasing something brighter because we tune lower. And everything about the guitar, like from my pickups and wood selection, everything is designed, even the bolt-on neck, we want snappy, we want bright. And that always seemed to be a challenge. With other strings, they're just never bright. It always sounds like the set might be dead out of the box. I'm not gonna name names. But, I'd found myself going brighter and brighter and brighter because that's what I was chasing. And I think in that process, I'd kind of ignored the body of the string. And obviously there's always a trade-off. And that was what I realized with working with you guys. It was like, oh my God, these sound so full. And I don't feel like I'm lost for top end. It might not be quite as bright as the brightest strings out there, but I don't feel like anything's missing. And the trade-off is I get all this warmth and body. Like when you're doing complex chords, you get like the harmonics out of it and you feel it. I don't know if it's a placebo effect or whatever. I feel like resonating against me, whether it's live or in the studio. It's a very satisfying feeling, and it makes your tone sound better. I'm not dialing in as much low end or whatever. I'm getting it from the guitar. So I had never even considered that until I swapped onto these strings, and that's why I called Brian. I was like, am I losing my mind here, or do these have like more? They give my guitar more low end.
They absolutely do, and that's something, as you said, you don't think about it, right? No. You think it's going to come from any other source. The string is just a shoelace that I'm putting on this shoe right here, right? But it's not that. It's so integral to the sound and the feel of your instrument. And as we got deeper and deeper into designing these sets, I think we discovered that more than we ever imagined was the case, right? And now it's like, I have to put them on every guitar, right? Yeah. I can't imagine playing a guitar without these strings on them because they become such an integral part of my sound and of the feeling of the instrument, right? You pick up anything else, you're like, oh, maybe it has that brightness, but it's missing something, right?
Well, now guitars, they're like strung without even our gauges. I'm just like, this feels so imbalanced to me. This instantly feels weird.
Yeah.
These will spoil you. And you know, I really think that anyone who actually plays in lower tunings especially, would realize like how different this feels, and then if they went back to their old set, they'd be like, oh, wow, like it's kind of like, I didn't realize what I've been playing with this whole time. So I've been kind of spoiled by this. I have these on all my guitars at home, so when I play someone else's guitar and they don't have them, I'm like, oh yeah,
it feels
strings.
weird. Those things, yeah.
And we even tweaked the trusty E standard set, whether you be 9 to 42 or 10 to 46. And that was always the thing, is which one are you, you know? And the answer is both.
That was the biggest thing for that set, because I play in standard tuning, and I love a lot of that classic stuff, but having played so many boutique guitars in the metal stratosphere, lower tunings, 8-string guitars, whatever, it gives you a completely different perspective on how you approach that, what feels good, what doesn't, particularly playing a lot of multi-scale instruments, right?
Yeah.
Which I still tend to gravitate towards straight scale, but there's something to be said about the way the strings feel on one of those, right?
Yeah.
And that definitely played into the design ideology behind the progressive tension strings to some extent. Progressive, it's all about like, how can we do what we need without caring about stepping on the toes of tradition in some way, right? It's like servicing that exact need as a guitarist. It's not like, oh, but my hero used this gauge or whatever. It's like, no, we're going to find exactly what works for this. And for the standard set in particular, me personally, I was totally selfishly seeking to make the exact string set that I wanted to use on my guitars, right? Which, had a much lighter feel in the high strings. But I realized that I still like thick, chuggy chords, right? You still want that snap in that low end that you might not even fully get out of a set of 10s, right? And that's why we went to a 47 with our lowest string, and it just made perfect sense once the set came together. And that's one of those things, like you plug it into a tension calculator, as we said, it might not perfectly line up scientifically, but after hours upon hours of meticulous testing, we discovered like that's what works. And then now, Misha, I know you put all your guitars that are in standard, you put that set on them too.
No, so that was a revelation, because I'd always had some guitars in standard tuning just because, well, I actually think a guitar in standard tuning with that set is like the best a guitar will ever play. And you're like, oh, that's why. You're always fighting something with these lower tunings. So I like having some guitars where it's just very pure, and it's like, yep, I might not record with them, but I jam on them. And like, I put the set on, and I guess I just didn't expect there to be that drastic a difference, because I felt like we were catering more to tunings and gauges where there was less representation, but everyone plays standard, right? And I was blown away. I was like, oh my God, like, so they even got the standard set kind of wrong. Because like, yeah, oh my God, transformed some of those guitars, and they were just, I mean, I hate to say it, but like, those are some of my favorite guitars to play in my collection. My standard tune with our 9 to 47, it's just like, this is the best this guitar will ever play and probably sound. And everything else, you're just fighting it. You know, obviously, like, I love the lower tuning, so we have to use them. And I do use them regularly. So, you know, it was kind of a surprise to see they improved that much on the standard end as well.
So then we applied that ideology to all of our sets, right?
Yep.
And one of the wonderful things with working with you guys is you were so open to exploring all the different possibilities that we wanted to explore in terms of catering to 7-string guitarists, 8-string guitarists, guys that might play 6 and tune super, super low, and play like brutal death metal stuff without wanting to use even a baritone or whatever, right? So we wanted to cater all those guys, and you guys were totally on board, which was huge for us, and a lot of fun too, because we get to step out of our element, I think, and set up guitars maybe in tunings that we might not play in regularly, right? To try to dial in every single set with that same ideology. Like if I was playing in B standard on a 6-string that's 25.5-inch scale, like, how can I get this guitar to react the same way that my standard tuning ones do with our standard 6 set, right? And I think that I'm really proud of what we ultimately achieved, that I think all of our sets kind of carry that same feel behind it, where they kind of wake the instrument up, so to speak, you know? And particularly extended range stuff, like 8 strings, I think it's so hard to find a set where either it doesn't feel like spaghetti or it feels like a telephone wire and is completely dead and has this like rubber band kind of feeling and vibe, right? So
those were probably the most challenging sets. We probably spent the most time on those because it's so subjective. It's such untreaded ground as well. And it is very subjective for us. But what's interesting is that people have really liked what we picked for that, you know? And we have a few options there, but like, being able to work with you guys, getting like half gauges in some cases, like that went a long way. And that's how nerdy we got. It is also, so I have to say, like, we're nerds. We are, admittedly, and working with nerds makes it even better. And you are too. So it's just like, oh, this guy will get it. Like, we can have these conversations. We can have hour-long conversations about strings, and it won't annoy them. You know, because we'll just keep on going.
And they'll last hours.
But it's great. I mean, this is a passion project. At the end of the day, everything we do is a passion project. It's amazing that people have liked the stuff that we do enough to support the business and get it to where it is. But we always entered these things being like, well, we'll see what happens. And at worst, like, we'll have something we like, you know? Like, that's worst case scenario, which in my opinion isn't so bad. So everything else is icing on the cake. And like, that's why we get so nerdy about this. It's because from our perspective, it's just this thing that we have the opportunity to do. Like, if you get to design like a string set and get so granular with it, why would you ever say no to that? That's insane. You know, of course we would be on that. So like that's where this has been so effortless, is it just feels like you're just having a nerdy conversation about strings with your buddies, you know? As one does.
As one does. It's basically what's happening right here, manifested into a much bigger picture.
We just did something about it.
We did something about it. Exactly. Yeah. And that's really, like, as I mentioned, the ideology behind Horizon devices in general. Like, every single thing that we do, it's like, I want this.
Yep.
It doesn't exist, but I want this. Like, what do we have to do to make it happen? And then along the way, you'd think by now that we would know that each time that we do this, we're going to end up making something that other people want to use too.
Yeah, but
we still don't.
It feels wrong.
It feels wrong, right? It feels wrong because it's always just like some selfish thing. Like, I want this string set, right? And if I could just somehow talk Dunlop into making this set, and then it exists, and then I never have to make a custom set again, great. And it's just serendipitous that other people love it and want to use it and put it on their guitars. And you know, I had no idea setting out that Misha would love these strings so much that he would put them on his guitars and you know, feel that was such an integral part of your sound, right? That now your actual signature.
That's what made us be like, oh, we're onto something here, you know? Like, when you get those moments when you're like, oh man, like, we shouldn't necessarily agree as much as we do, and we found something here. Like, we're like, maybe we found something kind of cool and something kind of special. The more people we introduce to it, they're like, whoa, that's awesome. I never thought of that, you know? And I'm like, I get it. I didn't think about this for the longest time too. It's just kind of a given. So hopefully we could just spread the word a little bit, because you know, I think if people get their hands on this, they'll be like, wow, like, this is a whole new dimension I hadn't considered before.
It's the hardest thing to get people to break out of habits, right? And we're creatures of habit. We find something that works, like, oh, I bought this guitar that had these strings on it, so that's just what I'm used to, so I'm going to keep buying that. And
we've all done that.
We've all done that, right? And this is a relatively small thing to step out of your box and try something different. And I think people will be very, very pleasantly surprised when they get their hands on these strings, as I am consistently every single time I restring a guitar with them. It's always like, wow, this thing came to life, you know, all over again.
Well, one of my favorite things to do is, like, you know, you get one of my non-signatures, because now they're supposed to all be coming with these, but like some other guitar and restring it. It's like, all right, this is what it feels like. You know? It's always like, you think the guitar's sick, just wait. We're just gonna restring it real quickly. So that's always the first thing. It's kind of a ritual with a new guitar.
I do the same thing, yeah. And now more so, you know, if you have a buddy builds you a guitar, a different manufacturer sends it, has a different company's strings on it, and you know, I'll strum a couple chords on it. I'm like, but I don't want to judge this guitar until I put our strings on it. And 10 out of 10 times, it's more resonant, snappier, more body right off the bat. And I'm like, here's the guitar.
Yeah, and this has been really apparent when we've been recording a lot lately, and just having that body, having the strings not be so shrill. And when it comes to recording, I mean, you guys all have experienced recording. What sounds good in the room and what sounds good perhaps in the center of a mix rarely works for like double track guitars. You usually have to go a little brighter. And especially for our kind of music, we're always kind of pushing the limit of brightness there. But you get too bright and like you go high up on the fretboard, or you use the higher strings, And it's like, it just gets shrill and ice picky. And it's a battle I'm fighting. And distortion is already a really terrible sound to be working with, but it's essential and necessary. So just having every tool at my disposal to help temper that a little bit goes a long way. And like just these strings, just swapping them out on certain guitars made them go from being too bright to like, oh, we can use this. There's literal guitars that I'd kind of been like, yeah, well, this is maybe more for jamming, because it's kind of satisfying or whatever when you're jamming on it. You're not paying as much attention. And they just didn't quite work in a recording context. And they do now. That's what it was. I'd never considered that before, I always thought, oh, I have to swap out the pickups or something like a lot more drastic and more expensive than just swapping out a set of strings. So that was one of the surprises from a recording standpoint, which kind of changed a lot and kind of changed how I look at my guitar collection a little bit.
That's what you have to do, Like we were just talking about that. Guitars, it's like, my tone's a little off, I need to buy a new amp. My tone's a little off, it must be my entire instrument, right? Like I need to get a new guitar now because to get one's a little darker. I think there's a certain bloom to the mid-range of these strings, right? That brings out what you were saying in the recording context that lets the guitar sit in the mix just a little bit better, find its place a little bit easier than it would. Yeah. And it seems like such an intangible thing, but you really, really do notice it, right? As you said, something that's normally too harsh, too bright, all of a sudden, it finds its little pocket. Can sit nicely where it wants.
It's kind of amazing how much of a difference that made for certain guitars. Because I had certain guitars that were just too bright. And it was like, no, it was actually just, maybe the guitar is very bright, but that with very, very bright strings and with not having a lot of body to them. I was like, well, this isn't really that usable, So, and this is why, by the way, while we were determining the gauges, we were always accounting for tone. Always. Because, depending on construction, whatever, like even a single gauge can sound differently. I mean, I know we debated a lot on the 7-string gauge, like we're going to do 64 versus 65, 66.
Yeah, that was the biggest.
And we were debating. That's where we were stuck. And it was like, there was always a case for tone in one direction, but stability and feel. And, that we always were accounting for those things. And you have to be not only a player, but you have to be picky. Like, what guitarists are like, and it's all in the minutia. It's all like all the tolerances are just the smallest amount, millimeters and all these things, and the feel for bending and all this kind of stuff. And unfortunately, all these abstract intangibles, right? And so you kind of have to have a level of trust and that you understand like, hey, he plays, he's on the level, So I knew that I could trust what he was coming at me with. And that's why we could have these conversations about, all right, are we biasing more towards tone or feel or whatever? And we'd always find a good compromise for that stuff. But like, that is the level that you have to be at to put a string set together, in my opinion. Or else you're just kind of throwing, darts at a dartboard and just hoping you hit something, right? So that is why I always say I love working with nerds, because that kind of talk doesn't get tiresome. They get excited by that,
Yeah, it's a level of obsession with, as you said, such a minutia of detail, right?
Yeah.
That, I think that's one thing that sets our strings so far apart from other strings on the market, right? We talked about people not only having no concept of the gauges that they're using, right? Like, oh, this is a 7-string set, right? With a 44, for the low B string. So if they're,
good luck.
Yeah, have fun with that. So if they're that level of disconnected, like what's to say about the minutia of tone and feel and all those other things, right? And I think as players, there's never been a set of strings that I've connected with, right? Because it's not something we think about, right? So I think maybe subconsciously on some level, we set out to create a set of strings that would give us that feeling, right?
Absolutely.
Where make you connect more with it. And it is something that's a bit of a go-to. Because I used to not care so much. It would be like, well, as long as it has these gauges, right?
But the fact is, strings are unsexy. Like, that's the thing. It's like a new amp. That's sexy. That'll fix my problem. A new pickup,
for that
sexy.
day.
And like, God, I'm so guilty of this too. I just want to throw money at the problem. Like, yeah, maybe I should get this like new old stock tube for the V1 in my amp. That'll make all the difference, And like, I mean, we know, like, yeah, it makes a difference, but like, does it, And that's the thing. It's like, it's just not as sexy to be like, let me change my strings on my guitar. Of course, it's like, yeah, maybe the new amp I'm gonna get, it's gonna fill the void in my soul, surely. So like, as well as give me better tone. So like, that's maybe a bit of the difficulty in sort of like spreading this message a little bit. But it's a bit of a utilitarian one, because I know that everyone who plays and everyone who's as much of a nerd about their guitar appreciates when something plays better, or just even a better setup on a guitar or whatever. And when you have an instrument that genuinely feels and sounds good, you know that instrument you reach for in your rack. You might have a guitar you think you like better, but you know the one you're reaching for like instinctively. And so whatever you can do to turn your instrument into that instrument, I think will definitely resonate with any other guitar nerds. So this is definitely an element that shouldn't be ignored. Of course, everything matters. It's only as good as the weakest link in the chain. But this is a link that's been long ignored, as far as I'm concerned. And it, as it turns out, a very important one.
So, the way, what Dunlop has to do with this really, because you guys did an amazing job of putting these sets together, and I think that's where really the difference with your sets is that balance that you get with those gauges that you put together. Here at Dunlop, when we have been designing strings, I've been looking for those key elements that you guys appreciate, having the proper amount of mid-range and low end, the body of the string and the brightness. And it has to be a certain kind of brightness. It can't just be that shrill, ice pick in the eardrum type of high end. It's got to be like the warm high end, which has a lot to do with how it sits in with the rest of the body of the string, and all that stuff, we wind it in, we bake it into the string, when we apply the wrap wire to the core wire, yes, there's a ratio with the core to wrap ratio and all that, but there's also the tension that the wrap wire goes onto the core wire, the angle. There's all these little minutiae things, that go into how a string's gonna vibrate in the end, and how it vibrates is going to determine all those key things that you guys are looking for. So I think it was very cool that when you came to us, you had already tried our strings and you said, these are interesting. We want to try our gauges now with these strings. And I thought that was really cool. And that was a lot of fun for me to do, because we hadn't really done it that deeply as you guys do, because that's what you guys do. And it was a lot of fun, man. It's been a great process, I think.
Yeah, agreed completely. And this is the level of detail that we look for in anyone that we work with, It's what's required, because otherwise you're talking shop with someone who doesn't understand the terminology that we're throwing at them. And as I said earlier, like, these are very abstract things. They're very hard to describe. So if you're in it and you play very well, you understand exactly what you're saying, because you were probably looking for very similar things. Exactly, yeah. So that shortcuts a whole conversation. You could be a phenomenal engineer, but if you don't play guitar, it's gonna be a whole bunch of conversations trying to explain in engineering terms what I'm looking for, which I can't do, So the fact that I could say—
I can't do it either.
Yeah, right. But we could all trust our ears. Yeah. And that's why it's important to have you on the ground here, also making sure that the manufacturing and the process, because as you said, all the little things make all the difference. Yeah. So having you here dictating that side of things, which we couldn't do. I wouldn't know the first thing about how to set that up. We'd probably get into it and spend years figuring it out, because it's fun. Right. But it's like, but you have the experience and the knowledge, so that we can just translate what we want, or rather you can translate that to, okay, well, here's how we make that happen. And like, that's the other piece of the puzzle. I've always said, like, there's a lot of companies that can do everything, very competent companies, but you want to work with people that you like and people that you have some chemistry with. And it was very clear from the first conversation, like, okay, he gets us. Like, this is gonna be fun,
It comes down to passion, I think, and we discussed how Horizon is a total passion company, right? And everything that we do, we're obviously obsessive about it and extremely passionate about it. Love guitar, love the strings. And I think from our first conversations, it was clear that you were equally passionate, not only about just the guitar as an instrument, about Dunlop, about the strings, like everything. And it was like, we found our teammate, in Frank. So
but this is rare. This is not a common
rare
quality. It's, it's just as much as you might meet another guitarist and like they might play guitar a little bit, but they're not like you're like, well, I'm not going to bore you with my vintage gear talk or whatever, we'll just keep it surface level. So it's always great when you find another, you always connect like, he's one of us, because that is always appreciated but never expected, and it is a rare commodity these days, I find.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here with you guys. I'm happy to be a part of this. I'm really proud of what you guys have done, and anything I can do to help is just bonus.
Well, we're proud to have you on board. Yeah, so I remember having a delivery at my house and opening the door, and it was a box so big that I don't think I could actually comfortably fit it through the front door, because it had like every conceivable string gauge ever made in the history of strings in it that Frank, you sent over to check out, which was a bit overwhelming, admittedly, but also like, okay, like I can't wait to just shut the doors and just disappear from the world from a few weeks and just string up a bunch of guitars and see what feels good. And I knew Misha was doing the same thing in tandem. And, it was a whole lot of back and forth, a whole lot of calling, but we both kind of laid low for a while and are kind of just like got our heads in the sand and try to test them out and see what we liked, right? And that's when we kind of came to the same things. But yeah, at first it was a mountain of strings shows up of every single conceivable gauge. And then, we're sorting them out, trying this, trying that. And, the amount of like little cuts I remember having on my fingers from like stabbing myself with the ends, just from so much meticulous restringing.
So that's not just me, because I wasn't going to admit to that.
It's not just you. I'm taking one for the team here, because just the sheer amount of restringing, and there's different guitars too, right? Not all of them have locking tuners, especially you're getting the 8th string, like whatever. After a while, my fingers were just toast. But I couldn't stop. It's like all I was thinking about, right? And you just like live and breathe it. And I could feel the further we got into this process, the more all of us were collectively obsessed with it and wanted to see it come to fruition and wanted to make something truly special. And I really feel that we did. I'm super proud of these strings, and I think we all are collectively, right?
Absolutely.
So the naming of the gauges really came from what we thought the guitarist approaching that particular set, like where they were going to be coming from. So, if they're coming from a place of playing super brutal music, drop down super low, they're going to see a set called Ultra Heavy 6, right? And that's immediately going to stand out to them. So it's kind of the terminology that we would use, I think, to describe those strings to play that style. Like, I'm going to play this band style music, so I need an ultra heavy set for that, right? And we just kind of took it from there. It's what felt organic. I think all of our naming.
Yeah, it's always difficult with this stuff because there's like 10 different approaches you could take to it, and none of them will ever be right. So we just kind of went with our gut on that one. Might or might not be the best way to name it, but it works for us, and we know what we're talking about. It's probably better that we at least have an understanding of why we named it, even if other people are like, well, I don't play heavy music. It's like, nah, but these are the gauges you want, Right. You'll figure that part out. Well, I mean, the bulb set is something that made sense since, I'm part of the company, and I've always been very picky about my gauges. I'm always getting asked what gauges I use. So I was like, well, it totally hasn't helped, but it might simplify it if I could just be like, yeah, it's the bulb 6, bulb 7, bulb 8 set, then you know exactly, because that's exactly what I use. And I don't have to detail all the string gauges and type it out every time. I could just be like, no, this is what I like. And more importantly, I don't have to have that awkward conversation of like, yeah, I guess you'll have to source like single strings. Sorry, pal. Right. So, it makes it very neat. It's just something because, I get that question a lot, and they seem to do well. So people seem to like them for the tunings that I use. We're using drop C on a 6 string or some variation where we're dropping the low string, hence the 58, which has some versatility, because sometimes that's seeing a low G, if you can believe it, which is quite a lot to ask of a string. But it's just something that represents like, yeah, I've spent many, many years refining this set for myself. So if you like my music, and if you play in a similar tuning or style or whatever, this might be a wonderful starting point for you.
And selfishly, as with all of our products are, right, you now have your own set. You don't have to find individual gauges. You don't have to build a set. Like, you just have your go-to. You got to play a show, just grab that set, throw it on the guitar.
I didn't want to start with selfishly, but it was selfishly. That is the main thing.